Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate. We're talking on the heels of the first round of local elections in this country that saw the far right score a historic 25% of the vote, but finish lower than polls had predicted on finishing second to the mainstream conservatives of former President Nicolas Sarkozy. With us to talk about it from Sarkozy's party, the UMP, Pierre Lequillet, conservative member of parliament and outgoing local councillor, Corinne Narassiguin, spokesperson for the Socialist Party. John Gaffney is with us from London. He teaches at Aston University. The National Front canceled late, after first accepting our invitation to take part in the discussion. Let's hope that they come back next time. Just to show you the front page of left-leaning Libération this morning, France cut in three, or the three Frances, that would be a better translation. Let me start with you, John Gaffney. Does this election officially mark the death knell of the old left versus right divide?
It's very difficult to predict what's going to happen, but everybody is in for a very bumpy ride from now on, partly because the electoral system is geared to one purpose and what's happening is following a different purpose. I don't think we really have three groups. I mean, the left is divided into two, and there is a major problem. I mean, Corinne's right when she says that that cooperation among those two parts of the divided left is much better at local level than at national level. But it really, the real stakes here are the upcoming presidential election the year after next. And I can't really see the left overall creating a kind of a necessary unity, which means that the mainstream left-wing party, the Socialist Party, you know, is way off target for a majority to govern. Now, we can say that there was a unity of the UMP and the UDI in this election, and that's a very good sign for the mainstream right. Nevertheless, I think they are in for a very, very bumpy ride too. And again, because of the presidential election. I mean, although Sarkozy has taken the credit for this development, the original idea was his rival for the presidential candidacy of the centre-right, Alain Juppé. So there will be major problems there. It's also probably true, I suspect, that as the National Front gets closer to power, it too will start exhibiting major lines of stress. Some of its officials and candidates, although it doesn't seem to have harmed their vote very much, have said things, racist things, anti-gay comments and so on, that will gradually start to win, if you like, the real disapproval of the French. So there's that to worry about.
John, let me ask you on this. We saw an election where, again, 1 in 4 voters voted for the National Front. Now, next Sunday's the runoff, and at the end of the day, they may have, in all, is more than 100 what they call départements, these regional districts in France.
Yes.
They may have maybe 1 or between 1 and 5 that they could win. So how will voters feel about it if they, at the end of the day, get very few seats to show for their 25%?
Yes, that is the other kind of sense of frustration that people who do vote for the National Front, and as we know, the numbers are increasing, they do feel as if they are being shut out of the political stage, and they are. So people in the UMP and the Socialist Party have to really start working out what they want their republic to be, because one has to recognise there has been some think tank activity and reflection, but as Corinne said to Pierre about she wasn't sure whether the UMP had a programme, one could actually say that one of the reasons why the Socialist Party is in such a mess in government is that it didn't have a programme either. The the 60-point project that François Hollande used, that had actually been drawn up by Martine Aubry for the presidential election, wasn't a proper reflected. The presidential nature of this republic stops the parties thinking properly about policy elaboration, about what is their attitude to this republic, and it's become a very highly personalised game of who's going to get the candidacy. Now is the time for the responsible political class in France to reflect upon what kind of republic it wants, because until they do come up with something, that I think that France is heading for political crisis. These parties.
Let me put that to the panel. Let's start with you,
yes.
Corinne. Again, I know that you don't agree with the views of the National Front, but what do you think of a democracy where a party gets 25% of the vote and just a handful of seats?
Well, this is.
Isn't it bad for democracy?
Well, this is the result of our conception of the political system in France, where we would like to have clear majorities. We are not a country that accepts very well coalition majorities, and I don't believe that the French people are really ready to see weird alliances in order to have the majority in a department or in a region. We've seen that in the past, and it didn't end well, and even less so at the government level. And there's going to be a question actually for UMP in the third round of this election, which is going to be electing the president of the département. Because in some places they might have a relative majority, and we might see some local back-end deals with the Front National in order to have a majority. So,
but is the system broken when a party that gets now 25% of the vote is underrepresented?
Well, it is not a national election in the sense that everything has to be won district by district. We have elections where we have proportional representation. The regional elections, actually, which we will have new ones at the end of this year. This is a proportional election, so we can see different type of results there. At the Senate, a lot of the districts actually for the Senate are proportional elections. So we do have some proportional representation in France already. I understand the argument. We have the same argument also on some of the parties on the left. The smaller parties on the left are asking for more proportional representation because of this. And this is definitely a discussion that we need to have about the institutions and whether we need also constitutional changes to make this happen. It's true that because the political landscape has changed, we do need to have a serious discussion about this.
What do you mean? What do you mean? Do you mean proportional for the legislative elections?
I think this is not something that François Hollande wants to put on the table at this time.
But I hope he will never put it on the table, because I'm absolutely against this system.
Yeah, I do believe that, actually. Yeah. I also do believe that, especially at the National Assembly, we need to have clear majorities. Yeah. I would prefer that we discuss if we were to discuss proportional representation, it would have to be on a very small.
It's a winner-takes-all democracy, isn't it? With the president wins right after you have legislative elections, and it's the party of the winner of the presidency who always gets the majority.
Yes, of course. But
so it's
what I would like to say, we are very attached to the Fifth Republic. The Fifth Republic. It's a majority system, because we have to have a majority in the National Assembly.
So what do you say to those 1 in 4 voters, the 1 in 4 voters who say
although they have the majority, you see what the problems they have in politics, in the Politics Act. Actually, I perfectly agree with John Gaffney, but I would like to say that the Front National, I hear very often it's an extreme right. It's more complicated than that. You have a lot of voters who come from people who voted Socialist or voted Front Gauche in the past, and who now, because they are deceived of the the political vision of François Hollande, vote Front National. They don't vote UMP or UDI. They go directly to the Front National.
Front National also taking UMP votes.
Of course, but I would like to insist on the fact that we say it's extreme right. It's more complicated than that. It's their program is very like the program of Front Gauche. An internal problems. They applauded, le Front National applauded with the Front de Gauche, they applauded the election of Mr. Tsipras in Greece. So you see, it's more complicated than that. And where I don't perfectly agree with John is that I think that if the socialists made a good politics, then the Front National would go down. It's very funny to see that when Mr. Mitterrand was at power, the Front National went up. When Mr. Hollande is at power, the Front National goes up. And this is...
their score increased in 2012 as well.
It's very interesting to see that it's when the socialists are at power, and the best example was when Mr. Jospin was prime minister, and that he was not even at the second round at the presidential elections, and the Front National, Mr. Le Pen, was present at the second round. So it shows that each time the socialists have the power, the Front National goes up. So there's a sort of deception.
I think we
in the
show a little humility and a little realism, because the Front National has been increasing in France for roughly the last 15 years, and the Front National did its best score at the presidential election after 5 years of Nicolas Sarkozy's presidency.
There was Mr. Le Pen.
No, it was Marine Le Pen.
A better score.
It was Marine Le Pen who did the best score in terms of.
Le Pen was Marine Le Pen was not at the second round.
Yeah, but she did in terms of the number of votes and the percentage. She was higher.
All right, so both sides.
So I think there's a shared responsibility in terms of
both sides taking their lumps. Very briefly, John Gaffney.
Yeah, just. Two things on that. The point Pierre makes about it being more complicated, it's true that, I mean, the tragedy for the two mainstream parties is that the traditional working class who used to vote left, half of them vote for the Front National. That's one thing. And the second thing that is worth bearing in mind is that it really isn't just the socialists, although Mitterrand played with fire when he brought the Front National into the mainstream of politics. Nevertheless, it is the failure of both of the mainstream parties and the whole political class not to take into account the kind of worries and exasperations and fears of the people who are now voting Front National. There is still time to do something, and let's hope the UMP and the PS actually start reflecting and doing exactly what they need to do.
All right. That's, of course, a reminder that we did invite the National Front to this discussion, and they were a late scratch from our conversation. There's the issue of what to do next Sunday when it's the runoff, when he spoke in his first election night since losing the 2012 presidential election. Nicolas Sarkozy address the sensitive issue of what to do in districts where it'll be the Socialists versus the National Front.
In those districts where our candidates are not in the second round, the UMP will call to vote neither for the National Front, with which we have nothing in common, nor for the candidates from the left, whose policies we fight.
I regret the stance taken by Mr. Sarkozy and the UMP. This is a moral failing and a political failing. When the choice is between a Republican candidate and the National Front, there's no hesitation. The left does not hesitate. The neither nor proposed by Nicolas Sarkozy is a failing that does not solve any of the problems that the UMP is currently facing.
Pierre Lequier, is it a moral failing not to call to vote against the National Front?
It's not a question of moral, it's a question of politics. We're fighting against the politics of the socialists. which is a catastrophe.
So it's more important to fight the socialists than the National Front.
I explained to you why the Front National was increasing. The socialists are in coalition or have an alliance with the Front Gauche. We have a position which is clear. We don't want at all, of course, no alliance with the Front National. We have nothing to see with them. But we have nothing to see either with the socialists.
So you put them on the same footing, the socialists and the National Front?
Front Gauche and Front National, yes.
But the socialists?
It depends.
You just said earlier that there was no way that the Front Gauche and the Socialist Party could work together, and now you're putting us in the same basket. So, but I think it's very important.
The base of your politics.
It's very important.
Till the last election is the alliance with Front Gauche. Now your relations are very bad, but at the beginning it was with the alliance.
Well, the Front Gauche never wanted to govern
with
us,
the program,
as
John said. With the program, as John said.
I think it's
Which
very dangerous.
was completely fool.
What you're doing is very dangerous by equating the Socialist Party with the Front National, because we disagree on policy. There is no question about that. We will continue to disagree on policy between the left and the right, but there is a difference between an adversary in the political arena and a party, the Front National, who is at odds with basic Republican values. Because if it's true that a lot of voters are not necessarily far right when they vote Front National because it's an expression of frustration.
Exactly.
Because there've been increasing inequalities in the countries for the past 20 years and a very high unemployment rate for the past 30 years. And there's a willingness to try something that hasn't been tried before. We shouldn't confuse that with who the Front National, their elected officials and their leaders actually are. And they are people who we've compiled a list of 120 candidates who've said homophobic, xenophobic, anti-Semitic, Islamophobic things during the election, and these are not isolated incidents. This is really what the National Front is about.
Let me ask John Gaffney about
this. There's a difference also. There's a confusion on the right because the UDI is actually making the difference between the Socialist Party and the Front National. They are calling to support the Socialist Party against the Front National when UMP refuses to do that.
John Gaffney, on that point, is Nicolas Sarkozy's policy of not calling for a vote against the National Front, is that a political winner?
To a certain extent, I understand Corinne's point about this kind of the sort of Republican, the need to support the values of the Republic. But the problem is it's a bit of a poison chalice for Sarkozy, because the UMP is the major opposition to the socialists, and they're and kind of almost sort of blackmailing them into voting for. Against the National Front and for the socialists. It's a kind of, it's a strange, you see, the strange thing is, funnily enough, that Marine Le Pen actually came out with what was probably politically the best answer, was to say, my electorate's grown up enough to make their own choices, and maybe you could get past the problem by doing this kind of thing. But I can understand this desire and this fear, because, I mean, it is clear that some of the things that some of the National Front candidates say are just awful. But
so let me ask you about that, John. On that point, do you see, as the landscape politically gets redrawn in France, something similar to what we see in neighboring Germany, where we'll have grand coalitions in the future, where most of the people will have, most of the mainstream will be together against the extremes?
Well, I mean, certainly politically, strangely enough, in spite of probably what the two people, our friends here, would say,
they're both shaking their heads. They're both
they're both shaking their heads, and they would, wouldn't they? But their policies are actually, when they're in government, they don't. The UMP is not like the British Conservative Party. and has an awful lot of kind of social legislation and concern, and a concern for social cohesion and this kind of thing. But partly the National Front is suffering from its own success. It's not just that there are people like that who support them, it's that, you know, they need candidates. The same thing is happening with UKIP, that a lot of the UKIP candidates come out with homophobic remarks and so on, much to the annoyance of the central party. So, but I think Grand Coalition, we'll see. We don't know. Possibly not. Nevertheless, the mainstream parties have to rethink the political landscape. It's an absolute imperative, and it's an imperative to work out how to respond to the aspirations of the people who are voting National Front.
Yeah.
Pierre Lequier.
First, the question you asked, I answer no, never. It's not because we couldn't work with... Sarkozy had a few ministers who came from the left at the beginning. We can work, but the problem is not that. The problem is that you have a constituency and you have a presidential election, and that divides the parties, and you have you can't have a coalition system like in Germany. It's absolutely
with such a strong presidency.
And second question you asked
very briefly,
the question you asked me at the moment.
We'll get back to it, but Corinne, very briefly.
Yeah, I agree. We cannot have a coalition because we actually have very different platforms between the left and the right. And it's certainly not in our political culture in France to have these kind of coalitions. And I think what we need to do on the left, because the question is really how to make sure that the Front National is not at the second round of the election in 2017. Really, that's really what the challenge before us is, and that is finding the new grounds for a new type of union on the left.
All right, we're gonna pick up on those points soon. We're out of time, unfortunately. Pierre Lequier, I want to thank you. I thank Corinne Narancigan. John Gaffney, apologies again for that late scratch from our guest from the National Front. Stay with us, though. Our Media Watch segment's next. Enter James Creedon. Hello,
Hi,
sir.
Francois. We're just taking a look at the press coverage of the local elections in France over the weekend, and in particular how the front pages dealt with the news. You have Le Monde in their front page this afternoon saying, are we heading into a three-party system in France as opposed to the traditional, I suppose, left-right divide? Now, one front cover for front page of Libération spoke about the same thing, speaking about three Frances, the left, the right and the far right. And they detailed it somewhat here in terms of the party's successes or lack thereof. UMP ahead, National Front confirming its, I suppose, growth or whatever, and the Socialist Party down at the bottom resisting being gnawed away at.
Yeah,
so that's
claiming victory.
Right, exactly. I think that's a slightly optimistic reading of things for the Socialist Party, and certainly the right-leaning Le Figaro had a different interpretation of how the Socialist Party, they were pretty much in agreement about the UMP being ahead because they were ahead, the National Front, you know, doing well too, but the Socialists were décroché. How would you translate that, François? I suppose it's falling behind indeed. So they were less generous than the left-wing Le Figaro. The communist newspaper said, in fact, that the government, Hollande and Valls, were sanctioned. They were being punished by the voters. And the Aujourd'hui en France says that this is advantage Sarkozy, using maybe some tennis lingo there. And for the business paper Les Echos, this is really about the National Front not having, in fact, I suppose, converted its advantage and to continue with the sports lingo. And but they're doing well, but not doing as well as they wanted to do, essentially. So that was their reading of things. Now, Le Monde had it whipped through the European press, and from their point of view, they summed up the European press's reaction to all this.
Sarkozy is the man of the day.
That's right. He blocked the National Front's, I suppose, advances. So that seems to be their reading of things. However, it appears that the French Prime Minister seems to be congratulating himself. Now, according to France Info Radio, he lit up a cigarette on election evening. A cigar, rather, indeed, even more celebratory mode. Now, we don't have any images, so this is all Twitter impressions or cartoonist impressions of that, but it appears the Prime Minister appears to think that he's the man responsible for blocking the National Front.
That's supposed to be Tony Montana and Scarface.
I think, there you go, but there's various other versions of it as well, Francois. You've got, yeah, that's the original, I think, isn't it? So the reason for this is he made a very passionate speech in Parliament where he had really lashed out at Marion Maréchal Le Pen, one of the Le Pen dynasty, saying that he would do whatever it takes to stigmatise the far right in France, and he was going to stand against them. So he was kind of declaring war against the National Front, and it appears, according to some in the media, that he thinks he's the man who saved France from being overrun by the far right. So whether it's Sarkozy or Manuel Valls, who knows? But anyway, they're congratulating themselves, it appears. All right, many thanks, James Creedon. I want to thank our panel once again, and thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.